I'm Shandra Erwin, 32, and I've spent my entire life being the invisible daughter. While my parents threw my brother Marcus a lavish celebration when he graduated medical school, complete with catered dinner and 50 guests, my tech company exit that netted me 8 figures was met with a polite, "That's nice, honey," over Sunday dinner. For 2 years, I watched them beam with pride over his residency updates, while my entrepreneurial success remained a footnote in family conversations. The dismissal stung, but I'd grown accustomed to living in Marcus's shadow. What I hadn't expected was the phone call that would change everything. When Forbes contacted my parents' house looking for me, wanting to feature my story on their 30 under 30 inches list, the sudden shift in their attention revealed truths about favoritism, recognition, and the price of being underestimated that would reshape our family forever. 2 years ago, I signed the papers that would change my life forever. The conference room at Morrison and Associates was sterile, all glass and chrome. But the documents spread across that mahogany table represented everything I've worked for since. College, my startup, Data Flow Solutions, had just been acquired by a Fortune 500 company for $87 million. My share, after investors and employee stock options, was a life-changing sum that most people only dream about. I remember staring at the acquisition agreement, my hands trembling slightly as I signed my name. The lawyers spoke in measured tones about escrow periods and earnouts, but all I could think about was calling my parents. This was my moment. After years of being dismissed as the dreamer, the one who chose computers over a real career, I had built something extraordinary. The drive home felt surreal. I kept the signed papers in a leather portfolio beside me, occasionally glancing at them like they might disappear. I'd rehearsed what I would say to my parents a dozen times. I imagined their faces when I told them about the sale, about the recognition from industry leaders, about the job offers that were already flooding in from Silicon Valley. When I arrived at their house that evening, they were in the kitchen preparing dinner. Dad was reading the newspaper while Mom stirred something on the stove. It was such an ordinary scene, but I was about to share the most extraordinary news of my life. "Mom, Dad," I said, my voice catching slightly with excitement. "I have something incredible to tell you." They looked up with mild interest, the same expression they might have worn if I'd announced I was changing my hair color. "I sold my company today," I continued, pulling out the portfolio. "The acquisition went through. It's a really big deal." Mom smiled politely. "That's nice, honey." "Will you still have a job?" "Mom, I don't think you understand. This is huge. I'm talking about enough money to, well, as long as you're happy," Dad interrupted, already returning to his newspaper. "Your mother made pot roast. Are you staying for dinner?" I stood there, portfolio in hand, watching them return to their evening routine, as if I just told them about the weather. The weight of their indifference hit me like a physical blow. This was supposed to be my moment the moment they finally saw me, finally understood what I'd been building all these years. Instead, we ate pot roast and talked about Marcus's latest rotation in the emergency department. They wanted to know every detail about his 12-hour shifts, his attending physician's feedback, his plans for choosing a specialty. Their eyes lit up when they spoke about him, animated in a way they never when discussing my work. Night, I drove home to my empty apartment, the acquisition papers now feeling heavy in my bag. I'd achieved something most entrepreneurs spend their entire careers chasing, but the people whose approval I'd sought my whole life had treated it like a minor inconvenience in their evening routine. I never told them the exact figure. What was the point? They'd already made it clear that my success, whatever its scale, would never measure up to Marcus's stethoscope and white coat. The money would change my life, but it wouldn't change how they saw me. That realization was perhaps more valuable than any acquisition could ever be. The pattern started early, though I didn't recognize it then. I was 7 when I brought home my first report card with straight A's, clutching it like a trophy as I ran through the front door. Mom was in the living room, folding laundry, when I thrust the paper toward her with trembling excitement. "Look." "Mom, all A's, even in math." She glanced at the report card, smiled, and patted my head. "Very good, sweetie. Go put this on the refrigerator." 20 minutes later, 9-year-old Marcus came home with his report card. He had mostly A's with a B+ in art. The reaction was immediate and unmistakable. "Marcus, come here, let me see that." Mom called, dropping the towel she was folding. "Oh my goodness, look at these grades." "Honey, come see Marcus's report card." Dad emerged from his study, beaming as he examined the paper. "Exceptional work, son. And look at this comment from your science teacher. Shows natural aptitude for analytical thinking." That's the mind of a future doctor right there. I watched. From the kitchen doorway, my own report card now relegated to the bottom corner of the refrigerator, held up by a magnet advertising the local pizza place. Same grades, different reactions. It was my first real lesson in the hierarchy of our household. The pattern continued through middle school and high school. When I won the state science fair with a project on renewable energy algorithms, local newspaper wanted to do a feature story. My parents politely declined, saying they preferred to keep our family out of the spotlight. But when Marcus made varsity tennis in his sophomore year, they organized a celebration dinner and invited the extended family. "We're so proud of Marcus," Mom would tell anyone who would listen. "He's pre-med, straight A's and an athlete. He's going to be a doctor." When people asked about me, the response was always more subdued. "Oh, Shandra's doing well too. She's good with computers." The dismissal stung, but I learned to internalize it. Maybe my achievements weren't as impressive as I thought. Maybe coding and technology were just hobbies, not real accomplishments. Maybe the hours I spent learning programming languages and building websites were just a phase I'd grow out of. I remember the day I got accepted to MIT with a full scholarship. I was 17, sitting in my bedroom when the email arrived. I'd been refreshing my inbox obsessively for weeks, and suddenly there it was, the acceptance letter I dreamed about since middle school. I printed it out with shaking hands and ran downstairs to find my parents. They were in the kitchen, and I could hear them on the phone with my grandmother, talking about Marcus's latest achievement. He'd been accepted to the pre-med program at State University. "I got into MIT," I announced, holding up the letter. "Full scholarship?" They looked at me with a mixture of surprise and confusion, as if I just told them I was moving to Mars. "Me too?" Dad asked. "The engineering school?" "It's not just engineering, Dad. It's one of the best computer science programs in the world. And they're paying for everything." Mom took the letter, scanning it quickly. "Well, that's wonderful, honey. But are you sure? It's so far away and it's so ... technical." "Mom, this is MIT. People dream about getting into MIT." "Of course," she said, but I could see the worry in her eyes. "It's just that Marcus will be so close to home, and medicine is such a stable career. Computers are fine, but what if the technology changes?" That night, I heard them talking in their bedroom. The walls were thin, and their voices carried down the hallway to my room. "I just don't understand what she wants to do with all this computer stuff," Mom was saying. "It's not like she's going to cure cancer or save lives. She's smart," Dad replied. "Maybe too smart for her own good. I just hope she doesn't get lost in all that technical nonsense and forget about having a real life." I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling, the MIT acceptance letter on my nightstand. Their concern wasn't about my happiness or my potential. It was about their inability to understand or value what I was passionate about. In their minds, Marcus was following a noble, comprehensible path. I was chasing something foreign and uncertain. The next morning, they made my favorite breakfast, chocolate chip pancakes, and told me how proud they were. But their pride felt hollow, obligatory. It was the kind of pride parents feel when their child does something they don't understand, but suppose they should celebrate anyway. Marcus, to his credit, was genuinely excited for me. He hugged me and told me I was brilliant, that MIT was lucky to have me. But even his support couldn't fill the void left by our parents' lukewarm response. That fall, I packed my bags for Cambridge, carrying with me not just my belongings, but a deep-seated need to prove myself. I told myself I didn't need their approval, that I would build something so significant that they'd have no choice but to recognize my worth. It would take me 15 years to realize that some people will never see you the way you need them to, no matter how successful you become. My dorm room at MIT was a cramped space barely large enough for a desk, but it became the birthplace of everything that would follow. While my roommates studied for organic chemistry exams, I spent my nights hunched over a secondhand laptop, sketching out ideas on napkins and notebook margins. The business plan for data flow solutions was born on the back of a pizza box at 2 a.m. During my junior year, the idea wasn't revolutionary, at least not at first glance. I noticed how small and medium-sized businesses struggled with data management, drowning in spreadsheets and disparate systems that couldn't talk to each other. They needed something simple, elegant, and affordable. Not the enterprise-level solutions that cost millions, but something a local restaurant or accounting firm could actually use. I remember calling home to tell my parents about my idea, expecting them to share even a fraction of my excitement. It was a Sunday evening, and I knew they'd be having dinner. "I think I'm onto something big," I told them, pacing my tiny dorm room. "I'm developing software that could help thousands of small businesses manage their data more efficiently. The market potential is huge." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "That's nice, honey," Mom said, "but don't let it interfere with your studies. You need to focus on getting good grades so you can find a stable job after graduation." "Mom, this could be my job. I'm talking about starting my own company." "Shandra," Dad's voice came through the speaker, patient but firm. "You're 19 years old. You need to finish school first. Get some real-world experience. Maybe work for an established company for a few years before you start thinking about entrepreneurship." The way he said entrepreneurship made it sound like a dirty word. But Dad, some of the biggest tech companies were started by college students. Facebook, Microsoft, Google, those are exceptions, not the rule, he interrupted. For every success story, there are thousands of failures. You're too smart to risk your future on a gamble. After I hung up, I sat in the silence of my dorm room, staring at the business plans spread across my desk. The papers were covered in my handwriting, sketches of user interfaces, financial projections based on market research I conducted myself. To me, it was a roadmap to independence and success. To my parents, it was a dangerous distraction from the safe, predictable path they'd envisioned for me. I didn't tell them that I already started building a prototype. Every night after classes, I coded until my eyes burned and my fingers cramped. I taught myself languages I never used before, watched countless YouTube tutorials, and pestered my professors with questions during office hours. The software slowly took shape, one line of code at a time, while Marcus was home for spring break. Enjoying family dinners and conversations about his pre-med coursework, I stayed at school, working on my project. I'd sleep 4 hours a night, subsisting on coffee and determination. My friends thought I was crazy, but I could see something they couldn't: the potential for something transformative. The first version of Dataflow was rough around the edges, but it worked. I tested it on a few local businesses near campus, offering it for free in exchange for feedback. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Business owners who had been struggling with data management for years suddenly had a tool that made their lives easier. "This is exactly what we needed," said Maria, who owned a small catering company. "It's like you were reading our minds." Those words meant more to me than any grade I'd ever received. I was solving real problems for real people, and that validation fueled my determination to keep building, but the isolation was crushing. While my classmates went to parties and football games, I was in my room coding and planning. I'd call home occasionally, usually when I was feeling particularly lonely, but the conversations always left me feeling worse. My parents would ask about my grades, my social life, my plans for internships at real companies. They never asked about Dataflow. "You're working too hard," Mom would say. "You need to have some fun. College is supposed to be the best time of your life." How could I explain that building something from nothing was the most fun I'd ever had? How could I tell them that every breakthrough, every solved problem, every satisfied customer was worth more than any party or social event? Senior year brought its own challenges. While my classmates were interviewing for positions at consulting firms and tech giants, I was bootstrapping my company with savings from a part-time job at the campus computer lab. I had 3 paying customers by graduation, and the revenue was growing monthly. The day I graduated, my parents attended the ceremony. beaming with pride as I walked across the stage, but I knew their pride was for the degree, not for what I built alongside it. They saw MIT as the achievement. I saw it as the launching pad. "We're so proud of you," Dad said at the graduation dinner. "Now you can get a good job and start building a real career." I looked at him across the table, this man who had raised me and loved me, but had never truly seen me. In his mind, I was still the same uncertain teenager who needed guidance and protection. He couldn't see that I'd already started building something extraordinary. That night, in my childhood bedroom, I made a decision that would define the next phase of my life. I wouldn't try to convince them anymore. I would simply build, create, and succeed on my own terms. If they couldn't see the value in what I was doing, I would prove it to them through results. The business plan I'd scribbled on that pizza box had evolved into something much bigger. Data Flow Solutions was no longer just an idea, it was a real company with real customers and real potential. I was 22 years old, and I was about to bet everything on a dream my parents thought was foolish. It was the best decision I ever made, even if it would take them years to understand it. The acquisition offer came on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. I was in my office reviewing quarterly reports when my assistant knocked on the door with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of excitement and disbelief. "Shandra, there's someone from Tech Global on the phone. They want to discuss a potential acquisition." Tech Global, one of the largest enterprise software companies in the world. I'd dreamed about this moment for years, but now that it was here, I felt strangely calm. Data Flow Solutions had grown from that pizza box business plan into a company with 43 employees, offices in 3 cities, and a client base that included some of the most respected businesses in the country. The next 6 weeks were a whirlwind of due diligence, negotiations, and sleepless nights. Tech Global's offer was aggressive. They wanted Data Flow not just for its current revenue, but for its potential to revolutionize how small businesses approach data management. The technology I'd built in my dorm room had caught the attention of industry leaders who saw what I'd seen all along. This was the future. The final negotiation took place in a boardroom that overlooked the city where I'd grown up. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the neighborhood where my parents still lived, where Marcus was completing his residency at the local hospital. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was about to achieve financial independence beyond my wildest dreams, and I could literally see the house where my accomplishments had been consistently dismissed. $87 million, the Tech Global CEO said, sliding the final offer across the mahogany table. "Cash and stock options. We want to keep you on as VP of Innovation for the small business division." I stared at the number, my hands steady despite the magnitude of what was happening. After taxes, after paying out my investors and employees, I would walk away with enough money to never work again if I chose. More importantly, I would have the validation I'd been seeking my entire life, not from my parents, but from the industry. Itself. The signing ceremony was surreal. Lawyers shuffled papers while photographers captured the moment for Tech Global's press release. I thought about calling my parents immediately, but something held me back. This was my moment, my achievement, and I wanted to savor it before sharing it with people who had never believed in it. The Forbes article was already in development. The journalist had interviewed me the week before, fascinated by the story of a young woman who had built a multi-million-dollar company from her college dorm room. She'd asked about my inspiration, my challenges, my vision for the future of small business technology. "What about your family?" she'd asked. "They must be incredibly proud." I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "They're supportive in their own way. My parents have always valued stability and traditional success. This path has been different from what they expected." The journalist had nodded knowingly. The entrepreneurial journey can be lonely, especially when the people closest to you don't understand the vision. That evening, I drove to my parents' house for our monthly family dinner. It was a tradition I maintained despite my busy schedule, partly out of love and partly out of hope that something might change. The house looked the same as always, the same beige siding, the same carefully maintained garden, the same sense of middle-class comfort and predictability. Marcus was already there, still in his scrubs from the hospital. He looked exhausted but satisfied, the way he always did after a long shift. Mom was setting the table while Dad carved the roast beef, both of them animated as they discussed Marcus's latest cases. Tell them about the cardiac arrest you handled. Yesterday, Mom urged as I walked in. Marcus launched into a detailed account of a successful resuscitation, his eyes lighting up as he described the medical procedures. My parents hung on every word, asking questions about medications and recovery times. Their engagement was immediate and genuine, the kind of attention I'd been craving my entire life. "How's work, Shandra?" Dad asked when Marcus finished his story. It was a polite inquiry, the kind you make when you know you should ask but don't particularly care about the answer. "Actually, I have some news," I said, my heart racing. "I sold Data Flow Solutions. The acquisition closed yesterday." The room went quiet. Mom looked up from her plate, confused. "Sold it? But I thought you loved that company." "I did love it. But sometimes the best thing you can do is recognize when you've built something valuable, enough that others want to invest in it on a much larger scale." "So what will you do now?" Dad asked. "Look for another job?" I took a breath, steadying myself. "Dad, this was an $87 million acquisition. I don't need to look for another job. I can do whatever I want." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Mom's eyes widened. Dad set down his knife and stared at me. $87 million? Mom whispered. "Dollars?" "Yes, Mom. Dollars. But that's impossible. You're 30 years old." "I'm 32, Mom, and it's not impossible. It's what happens when you build something valuable and find the right people to recognize that value." The rest of the dinner passed in a strange haze. My parents asked tentative questions about the sale, the money, the future, but I could see they were struggling to process what I told them. This wasn't the modest success they'd expected from their daughter's computer hobby. This was wealth beyond their comprehension, achieved through a path they'd never understood or encouraged. As I drove home that night, I felt hollow despite the magnitude of my success. I achieved something extraordinary, but the people whose approval I'd sought for so long seemed incapable of truly understanding or celebrating it. The money would change my life, but it wouldn't change the fundamental dynamic that had shaped my relationship with my family. I had no idea that a phone call from a Forbes journalist would soon change everything, not just how the world saw me, but how my parents finally began to see me too. Marcus's medical school graduation was everything mine had never been. The ceremony was held at the university's grand auditorium, with soaring ceilings and stained glass windows that cast colored light across the assembled families. I sat in the third row, watching my parents' faces as they waited for Marcus to receive his diploma. When his name was called, Mom actually gasped. Dad stood up, clapping so enthusiastically that people in nearby rows turned to look. I watched my brother cross the stage in his cap and gown, the embodiment of everything our parents had ever dreamed of. Dr. Marcus Erwin, the title they'd been anticipating since he was in middle school. The celebration afterward was elaborate in a way that felt both foreign and familiar. Our house was transformed with catered food, fresh flowers, and a banner that read, "Congratulations, Dr. Marcus." In elegant script, extended family had driven in from 3 states. High school friends, college roommates, fellow medical students. The living room was packed with people who had come to honor this milestone. I stood in the corner, nursing a glass of wine and watching the festivities unfold. Aunt Helen grabbed my arm as she passed. "Isn't this wonderful?" "Your parents must be so proud. A doctor in the family." "Yes," I agreed, forcing a smile. "It's a big day." "And what do you do again, dear?" "I work in technology, software development." She nodded politely, the way people do when they don't really understand but don't want to appear ignorant. "That's nice. Computers are so important these days." The conversation ended there, and she moved on to talk to someone else about Marcus's plans for residency. I'd had variations of this exchange a dozen times already, each one reinforcing my position as the sister with the less impressive career. The centerpiece of the celebration was a slideshow Mom had prepared. chronicling Marcus's journey from childhood to medical school. There were photos of him in his first white coat, studying at the library, receiving academic awards. The images were set to music, and I watched our relatives tear up as they witnessed his transformation from boy to doctor. He's always been special, Mom said when someone complimented the presentation. Even as a child, we knew he was destined for something important. Saving lives, helping people, that's what he was born to do. I thought about my own graduation from MIT, attended by my parents, and celebrated with dinner at a chain restaurant. There had been no slideshow, no extended family, no banner. Just quiet acknowledgement of a degree they didn't fully understand in a field they considered temporary. The speeches started after dinner. Dad stood up first, clearing his throat as the room fell silent. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight to celebrate our son's incredible achievement. From the time Marcus was young, we knew he was special. He had this way of caring for people, of wanting to help when others were hurt or sick. He paused, looking directly at Marcus with an expression of pure pride. Becoming a doctor isn't just about being smart, though. Marcus certainly is that. It's about having the character to dedicate your life to service, to put others' needs before your own. It's about having the courage to make life or death decisions and the wisdom to keep learning throughout your career. The room erupted in applause. I clapped along, genuinely proud of my brother's accomplishments, but acutely aware of the contrast of my own experience. When I'd started Dataflow, Dad had worried about my risky career choice. When Marcus chose medicine, he called it a noble calling. Marcus's speech was gracious and humble, thanking our parents for their unwavering support and acknowledging the sacrifices they made to help him reach this moment. He talked about the responsibility of being a doctor, the trust patients place in their physicians, the privilege of being able to heal. I couldn't have done this without my family. He sighed, his voice thick with emotion. Mom and Dad, you believed in me even when I doubted myself. You supported me through every challenge, every exam, every moment of uncertainty. Shandra, you've been the best sister I could ask for, always pushing me to be better and celebrating every success along the way. The applause was thunderous. I felt tears in my eyes, not from sadness, but from the complex mixture of love, pride, and longing that had defined my relationship with my family for so long. I was genuinely happy for Marcus, but I couldn't help wondering what it would feel like to be celebrated this way, to have your achievements recognized not just as personal victories, but as family triumphs. The evening wound down with more congratulations, more photos, more promises to stay in touch. I helped Mom clean up afterward, stacking chairs and throwing away paper plates while she talked about how perfect the day had been. Did you see Dr. Peterson's face when Marcus was talking about his research? She asked. He was so impressed. And the way everyone responded to the slideshow, I think people really understood what an achievement this is. It was a beautiful celebration, Mom. Marcus deserves all of this. She paused in her cleaning, studying my face. You know, honey, I hope you don't feel... we're proud of you too. Your computer work is important. The qualifier stung. Computer work. Not my company, not my achievements, not the technology I built that was changing how businesses operated. Just computer work. As if I spent my days playing video games. I know, Mom. I'm happy for Marcus. Really. And I was happy for him. But I was also tired of being the daughter whose accomplishments were footnotes in family conversations. Tired of watching my parents' eyes light up for his stories while mine were met with polite indifference. That night, I drove home to my empty apartment, past the house where the celebration had continued long after I'd left. I thought about the banner, the slideshow, the speeches, the overwhelming sense that Marcus's success was a family victory. While mine remained a personal pursuit, I had no way of knowing that within months, a phone call would change everything, forcing my parents to confront the reality they'd been avoiding for years. But that night, all I felt was the familiar ache of being invisible in my own family, watching from the sidelines as someone else received the recognition I'd been craving. My entire life. The call came on a Thursday afternoon in March. I was in a meeting with my new team at Tech Global, discussing integration strategies for Dataflow's technology when my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Strange call for you today. A reporter? Said it was urgent. Left a number. I stared at the message, my attention drifting from the presentation on market penetration strategies. A reporter wanting to talk to me? It wasn't entirely unusual. Data flow had received some trade publication coverage over the years, but something about Mom's tone suggested this was different. The meeting dragged on for another hour, filled with discussions about synergies and cross-platform opportunities. My mind kept wandering to that text message. Why would a reporter call my parents' house? I'd been careful to keep my professional and personal lives separate, partly to shield my family from the chaos of startup life and partly to protect myself from their lukewarm interest in my work. When the meeting finally ended, I called my mother back. Mom, what was this about a reporter? Oh, honey, it was the strangest thing. This woman called around noon, said she was from Forbes magazine. She was looking for you. Said she'd been trying to reach you through your company, but kept getting transferred around. Forbes. My pulse quickened. Forbes wasn't a trade publication. It was one of the most prestigious business magazines in the world. Did she say what she wanted? Something about an article they're working on. She seemed very excited, kept saying how impressed they were with your story. I told her I'd pass along the message, but honestly, I wasn't sure what story she was talking about. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, I'd been trying to get my parents to understand the significance of what I built. Now a Forbes journalist was calling their house, and they still didn't grasp what it meant. Did she leave her contact information? Yes. Let me find it. I heard papers rustling. Here it is. Sarah Chen, senior staff writer. She said to tell you she's working on a piece about young entrepreneurs who are changing the business landscape. I wrote down the number, my hands trembling slightly. Forbes. Young entrepreneurs, changing the business landscape. These were the words I dreamed of hearing associated with my work. Mom, do you understand what this means? Well, I assume it's good news. You sound excited. Forbes it's one of the most important business publications in the world. If they want to feature me, it means they think what I've accomplished is significant. There was a pause. That's wonderful, dear. I'm sure you'll do great in the interview. The conversation ended with the usual pleasantries, but I could sense Mom's confusion. To her, this was just another work-related call, no different from the dozens of business interactions I've mentioned over the years. She couldn't see that this represented validation on a scale I'd never imagined possible. I called Sarah Chen immediately. Her voice was warm and professional with an underlying excitement that made my heart race. Shandra, I'm so glad you called back. I've been following your story since the data flow acquisition, and I have to say, I'm incredibly impressed. Building a company from nothing and selling it for nearly $90 million by age 32, that's exactly the kind of story our readers want to hear. Thank you. I'm honored that you're interested. I'm working on a feature about young entrepreneurs who are disrupting traditional industries. Your background is fascinating. MIT graduate, solo founder, bootstrapped growth. And the acquisition by Tech Global has positioned you as a real player in the enterprise software space. She spoke for 10 minutes about the article's scope, the other entrepreneurs being featured, the timeline for publication. Every word felt like affirmation of choices I'd been second-guessing for years. I'd love to schedule a formal interview, but I also want to get some background from people who know you well. Family, friends, maybe some early employees. Would that be possible? I hesitated. My family isn't. They're not really involved in my professional life. They might not be the best sources for business insights. Actually, that's part of what makes your story so compelling. I spoke with several of your former employees, and they all mentioned how you seem to be doing this entirely on your own. No family connections, no trust fund, no safety net. Just pure determination and vision. After we hung up, I sat in my office staring out at the city skyline. For the first time in my career, someone from the outside was recognizing not just my success, but the difficulty of achieving it without the support systems that many entrepreneurs take for granted. Thought about calling my parents to explain what this meant, but I realized something had shifted. For years, I'd been seeking their approval, trying to translate my achievements into language they could understand and appreciate. But Sarah Chen understood immediately. She saw the significance without needing it explained or justified. Forbes' article would be published whether my parents understood its importance or not. The business world would learn about data flow solutions and the woman who built it from nothing. My story would be told, and it would be told accurately by someone who recognized its value. For the first time in my life, I felt truly seen not by my family, but by the people who mattered most in my professional world. It was a bittersweet realization. I'd spent so long trying to prove myself to people who couldn't see my worth that I'd almost forgotten there was a whole world of people who could. The phone call had lasted 23 minutes. In that brief conversation, my perspective on success, validation, and family dynamics had fundamentally changed. I was no longer the daughter trying to earn her parents' approval. I was a successful entrepreneur whose story deserved to be told on a national stage. The real reckoning would come when that story was published. But for now, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the quiet confidence that comes from being truly understood and appreciated for who you are, not who others expect you to be. The change in my parents' behavior was immediate and unsettling. 3 days after the Forbes journalists had called their house, Mom called me with an enthusiasm I hadn't heard in years. "Shandra, honey, I've been thinking about what that reporter said. Can you explain more about what you do? I realize I don't really understand your work." I was sitting at my kitchen table eating breakfast and reading emails when her call came through. The request caught me off guard. For 15 years, I'd been trying to explain my work to them. Now, suddenly, they wanted to listen. "What specifically would you like to know, Mom?" "Well, everything, really." "What was Data Flow Solutions? What did you sell exactly? And why was it worth so much money?" I spent the next hour walking her through the basics of enterprise software, data management, and the small business technology market. She asked detailed questions, taking notes. I could hear the scratching of her pen against paper. "So you built this all by yourself, from your dorm room?" I had help eventually, but yes, the initial concept and development were mine. And other companies were interested in buying it. Tech Global wasn't the only one. We had multiple offers. The pride in her voice was unmistakable. "That's incredible. Honey, I had no idea it was such a big deal." After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at my phone. Where had this curiosity been when I was 22 and desperate for their support? Where was this interest when I was working 8-hour days, building something I believed in while they worried about my unstable career choice? The next call came from Dad that evening. "Shandra, your mother's been telling me about your business. I have to admit, I'm impressed. I never understood what you were doing, but it sounds like you built something really significant." "Thank you, Dad. It means a lot to hear you say that. I've been doing some research online about the technology industry. Did you know that some of the most successful companies in the world are software companies? Microsoft, Apple, Google, they're all worth hundreds of billions of dollars." I almost laughed. "Yes, Dad, I know. And you're part of that industry now? That's remarkable." The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, with Dad asking questions about my role at Tech Global, my future plans, the potential for growth in the technology sector. It was the longest conversation we'd had about my work in my entire life. Over the following weeks, their newfound interest intensified. Mom started sending me articles about female entrepreneurs, as if she'd suddenly discovered that women could be successful in business. Dad began mentioning my work to his golf buddies, proudly referring to me as his daughter, the tech executive. The shift was most apparent during our monthly family dinners. Instead of discussing Marcus's medical cases exclusively, they began asking about my projects, my colleagues, my opinions on industry trends. "Tell us about this artificial intelligence thing," Mom said during one dinner. "I read an article that said it's going to change everything. And what about this cryptocurrency?" Dad added. "Is that something you're involved with?" I found myself in the surreal position of being treated like an expert on subjects I'd been discussing for years, subjects they'd previously dismissed as too technical or temporary to matter. Their questions were earnest but elementary. revealing just how little they'd absorbed during all those years when I tried to share my passion for technology. Marcus noticed the change too. During one family gathering, he pulled me aside. "They're really interested in your work suddenly. It's like they just discovered you exist." "I know, it's weird, isn't it?" "A little, but maybe it's good. Maybe they're finally understanding what you've been doing all this time." I wanted to share his optimism, but something about their sudden attention felt hollow. It reminded me of fair weather friends who only call when they need something, or acquaintances who suddenly become interested in you when they discover you're famous. The most telling moment came when Mom asked if I could help her understand the Forbes article before it was published. "I want to be able to talk about it intelligently when people ask," she said. "Your father and I are so proud, but we don't want to sound ignorant about your accomplishments." There it was, the truth underlying their sudden interest. They weren't curious about my work for its own sake. They were concerned about how their lack of understanding might reflect on them when the article came out. They wanted to be able to claim credit for my success without having to admit they'd never supported or understood it. I began to see their questions differently. When Mom asked about my college experience, she was really asking how she could explain my MIT education to her friends. When Dad inquired about my future plans, he was looking for talking points that would make him sound like a supportive father. The irony was profound. For years, I'd craved their interest and approval. Now that I had it, I realized it was motivated not by genuine curiosity about my life and work, but by their desire to be associated with success they played no role in creating. Their sudden attention was a reminder of how invisible I'd been in my own family. They were scrambling to understand my accomplishments not because they valued me, but because they realized other people valued me. The Forbes journalist call had been a wake-up call, forcing them to confront the reality that their daughter had achieved something significant, something they'd missed entirely. I answered their questions patiently, explaining concepts and providing context they should have sought years earlier. But with each conversation, I felt the distance between us growing. They were trying to insert themselves into a success story they'd never bothered to understand while it was being written. The validation I'd sought from them for so long was finally coming, but it felt empty. Real support would have been there during the difficult years when I was building something uncertain and unproven. This retroactive interest was about their image, not my achievements. Still, I held on to hope that maybe, just maybe, this could be the beginning of a different kind of relationship, one where they saw me clearly and valued what I built. I wouldn't realize until much later that genuine understanding and manufactured interest are two very different things. Marcus called me on a Sunday morning, his voice carrying a tension I rarely heard before. "Shandra, we need to talk. Can you meet me for coffee today?" Something in his tone made me cancel my plans. We met at a small cafe near the hospital where he was doing his residency, the same place where we'd caught up countless times over the years. But this felt different, more serious, more weighted. He looked exhausted, which wasn't unusual for a resident, but there was something else in his expression. Uncertainty, maybe even vulnerability. "I heard about the Forbes article," he said, after we'd ordered. "Mom and Dad can't stop talking about it." "I know. It's been ... strange. Suddenly they're fascinated by everything I do. That's part of what I wanted to talk to you about." He stirred his coffee absently, not meeting my eyes. "I have to admit, I'm struggling with this whole situation." "Struggling how?" "With this sudden shift in how they're treating you, with the way they're talking about your success, with ... He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "With the fact that I'm having feelings I'm not proud of." I'd never seen Marcus this vulnerable. He'd always been the confident one, the golden child who moved through life with the assurance that comes from constant validation. What kind of feelings? Jealousy, I guess. Which is ridiculous, because I'm proud of what you've accomplished. I've always been proud of you, even when our parents didn't seem to notice. But now they're noticing, now that they're talking about you the way they used to talk about me. He trailed off, shaking his head. "Marcus, you're a doctor. You're saving lives. That's incredibly important work. I know. And I love what I do. But Shandra, you built something from nothing. You created jobs, you solved problems, you changed an entire industry. And you did it all without any help from anyone. The admission hung between us. For the first time, I saw my brother not as the favored child, but as someone who had carried the weight of expectations his entire life. I've been thinking about our childhoods, he continued, about how differently our parents treated us. I knew it was happening, but I told myself it was just because they understood my path better. Medicine is straightforward. You go to school, you train, you practice. What you did was, it was brave in a way I never had to be. Marcus, let me finish. I've been getting a lot of attention lately from Mom and Dad because I published a research paper in the Journal of Emergency Medicine. It's a good paper, solid research, but it's not groundbreaking. It's the kind of thing residents are expected to do. He pulled out his phone and showed me the article. I was so excited when it came out. I thought it might help me stand out and the residency program maybe get noticed by the attendings. But when I told our parents about it, their reaction was lukewarm. What do you mean? They congratulated me, of course. But then Dad said something about how impressive it was that I was following in Chandra's footsteps by getting published. Mom started asking if I thought I could get featured in Forbes too. I felt a pang of sympathy for him. I'm sorry, Marcus. That must have been frustrating. It was. But it also made me realize something I should have understood years ago. They've always defined success for me in terms of external validation. Good grades, awards, prestigious positions. I never had to prove myself the way you did, because they already believed in my path. But they were right to believe in you. You are successful. Am I, though? I'm 34 years old, and I've spent my entire life following a predetermined script. College, med school, residency, fellowship. I've never taken a real risk, never built anything, never had to rely on just my own vision and determination. The conversation was revealing layers of family dynamics I'd never considered. While I'd been struggling for recognition, Marcus had been carrying the burden of being the sure thing. The child of success was assumed rather than earned. Do you know what the hardest part is? He asked. Watching our parents suddenly understand what you've accomplished and realizing they never really understood what I was doing either. They just liked the idea of having a doctor in the family. What do you mean? They never asked about my research, my patient interactions, the actual work I do. They just wanted to tell people their son was a doctor. It was about the title, not the substance. I reached across the table and touched his hand. Marcus, you chose medicine because you wanted to help people. That's who you are. The fact that our parents didn't understand the depth of what you do doesn't diminish it. I know that intellectually. But emotionally, it's hard to watch them scramble to understand your work after years of dismissing it, while simultaneously realizing they never really understood mine either. We sat in silence for a moment, two siblings processing the complex dynamics that had shaped our relationship with our parents and each other. There's something else, Marcus said finally. I've been thinking about starting my own practice someday, maybe focusing on emergency medicine education, developing new training protocols. But I'm scared. Scared of what? Of failing. Of not having the safety net of institutional support. Of having to prove myself in a way I never have before. He looked at me with something approaching admiration. You've been doing that your whole life. I don't know if I have that kind of courage. You do, I said firmly. You've just never had to use it because you chose a path that our parents understood and supported. That doesn't make you weak, it makes you smart. Maybe, but I look at what you've built and I realize I've been playing it safe my entire life. I've been the good son, following the expected path, while you've been the pioneer, creating something entirely new. The conversation continued for another hour, touching on childhood memories, family expectations, and the weight of being seen as either the favorite or the disappointment. For the first time, I understood that Marcus's position as the golden child had been both a blessing and a burden. When we finally parted ways, I felt closer to my brother than I had in years. We'd both been shaped by our parents' expectations, just in different ways. He'd been pushed toward safety and conventionality, while I'd been left to find my own way without support or understanding. The Forbes article would change how the world saw me. But this conversation with Marcus changed how I saw our family. We were all products of the same system, one that valued certain types of success while overlooking others. One that provided support for predictable paths while withholding it from unconventional ones. Understanding this didn't make the years of dismissal hurt less, but it did help me see that our parents' behavior had affected both of us, just in different ways. Marcus had been given a roadmap, but never encouraged to explore. I've been given freedom, but never offered guidance. Now, as adults, we were both grappling with the consequences of those choices and perhaps finally beginning to understand each other. The discovery happened by accident. I was helping my parents organize their home office for taxes when I stumbled across a file folder labeled Marcus Education. Inside were carefully preserved documents spanning his entire academic career. Tuition receipts, housing payments, book allowances, even receipts for his white coats and medical equipment. I sat on the floor of their office, spreadsheets and bank statements scattered around me, adding up numbers that told a story I'd never fully understood. Over 8 years, my parents had invested nearly $300,000 in Marcus's education and living expenses. Medical school alone had cost $180,000 in tuition, not including the apartment they'd rented for him, the car they bought him, or the monthly stipend that had covered his living expenses. Shandra, did you find the 2019 tax documents? Mom called from the kitchen. Still looking, I replied, my voice catching slightly as I stared at a check stub for $2,400 labeled Marcus, monthly support. For 4 years of medical school, they'd given him what amounted to a full-time salary so he could focus on his studies without the distraction of work. I thought about my own college years, working 20 hours a week in the computer lab to pay for textbooks and ramen noodles. In another folder, I found my own educational records. The contrast was stark. My MIT tuition had been covered by scholarships and grants, which my parents had celebrated as getting a free education. What they hadn't helped with were the living expenses, the textbooks, the equipment I needed for my computer science courses. I'd taken out $40,000 in student loans, which I'd paid off myself after graduation. The most telling document was a handwritten note in my mother's careful script. Marcus Medical School Fund, $50,000 initial deposit, $2,400 per month ongoing support. Total projected $280,000. Below it, in the same handwriting, Shandra, self-sufficient, good student, will find her own way. Self-sufficient. The word that had defined my entire relationship with my parents. They'd seen my independence as a strength that required no nurturing. While viewing Marcus's dependence as a sign that he needed their support, I found records of other gifts too. A $15,000 car for Marcus when he started his residency. A $5,000 contribution to his apartment, deposit, even a $1,200 payment for a professional conference he'd wanted to attend. Every milestone in his life had been financially supported, every challenge cushioned by their generosity. When I'd started Dataflow Solutions, I'd asked my parents for a $10,000 loan to help with initial operating costs. Dad had given me a lecture about the importance of not mixing family and business, about how entrepreneurs needed to sink or swim on their own. I ended up maxing out my credit cards instead. Find anything interesting? Dad asked, appearing in the doorway. I looked up from the financial records spread across the floor, just getting a sense of the family finances. You and Mom have been very generous with Marcus over the years. Well, medical school is expensive. We wanted to make sure he could focus on his studies without worrying about money. What? About when I was starting my business? I asked for help then too. Dad shifted uncomfortably. That was different, Shandra. Marcus was following a traditional path. Medical school leads to residency. Residency leads to a stable career. What you were doing was ... uncertain. Uncertain. You have to understand, we'd never seen anyone start a business from scratch. We didn't know if it would work out. With Marcus, we knew that if we invested in his education, he'd have a secure future. I held up one of the bank statements. You gave him $48,000 during his 4th year of medical school alone. That's more than most people make in a year. Shandra, why are you bringing this up now? Marcus needed that support, and I didn't? The question hung in the air between us. Dad sat down in his desk chair, looking older than I'd ever seen him. You were always so capable, he said finally. Even as a child, you figured things out on your own. You got scholarships, you found jobs, you solved problems. We thought you preferred being independent. I preferred being independent because I had to be. Because when I asked for help, you told me I needed to learn to stand on my own. That's not. He stopped, seeming to realize that arguing would only make things worse. Maybe we made mistakes. Maybe we should have helped you more. I gathered the documents into neat piles, my hands shaking slightly. It's not about the money, Dad. It's about what the money represented. You invested in Marcus's dreams because you believed in them. You didn't invest in mine because you didn't. We believe in you now after Forbes called. After you realized I'd succeeded without your help, the silence stretched between us. Through the window, I could see Mom in the garden, pruning roses with the same methodical care she'd applied to managing Marcus's education fund. I found something else, I said, pulling out a folder labeled Insurance Life. Inside were policy documents showing my parents as beneficiaries on a $500,000 life insurance policy Marcus had taken out when he started his residency. He wanted to make sure we'd be taken care of, Dad explained, in case something happened. To him, what about my policy? Your policy? My life insurance policy, the one where you're listed as a beneficiary? Dad's face went blank. I don't think you have one. Because when I was building my company, working 18-hour days, facing the stress that kills entrepreneurs, you never suggested I might need life insurance. You never worried about what would happen to me if I failed. The weight of this realization settled over both of us. They'd protected Marcus from financial risk while leaving me to face it alone. They'd planned for his future while assuming I'd figure out my own. Shandra, I think you're reading too much into this. We love you both equally. Love isn't the same as support, Dad. Love isn't the same as investment. Love isn't the same as believing in someone's dreams. I stood up, leaving the financial documents scattered across the floor. I need some air. As I walked toward the door, Dad called after me. Shandra, wait. Let's talk about this. But I was already leaving, carrying with me the clear evidence of what I'd suspected my entire life, that my parents had bet on Marcus's future while leaving me to bet on my own. The numbers didn't lie, even if the explanations did. The drive. Home was a blur of emotions. Anger at the unfairness, sadness at the lost opportunities for connection, and a strange sense of relief at finally understanding the dynamics that had shaped my relationship with my family. I'd succeeded despite their lack of support, not because of it. The financial records were proof that my achievements had been earned without the safety net they'd provided for Marcus. In some ways, that made my success more meaningful, but it also made their recent attention feel even more hollow. They were celebrating a victory they'd never believed in, claiming pride in achievement they'd never supported. The Forbes article would tell the world about my success, but these financial documents told the real story of how that success had been achieved entirely on my own. The Forbes interview took place on a Tuesday morning in Tech Global's executive conference room. Sarah Chen arrived precisely on time, carrying a leather portfolio and a digital recorder that looked like it had seen countless important conversations. She was younger than I'd expected, probably in her early 30s, with the kind of focused energy that comes from loving what you do. Thank you for making time for this, she said as we settled into the sleek chairs around the conference table. I've been looking forward to this conversation since I first heard about data flow solutions. The interview began with standard questions about my background, my education, the genesis of the company. But Sarah's approach was different from other journalists I'd spoken with. She wasn't just interested in the business metrics, she wanted to understand the human story behind the success. Tell me about the early days, she said, leaning forward with genuine curiosity. What was it like building a company from your dorm room? I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't expected. I told her about the late nights coding, the fear of failure, the exhilaration of landing those first customers. I described the isolation of entrepreneurship, the weight of making decisions that could affect not just my future, but the livelihoods of the employees I'd hired. What about support systems? She asked. Family, friends, mentors who helped you through the difficult periods? The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on my professional achievements that I hadn't prepared for inquiries about my personal life. I was pretty much on my own, I said carefully. My family, they didn't really understand what I was doing. They supported me in their own way, but they didn't grasp the significance of what I was building. That must have been challenging. Starting a company is stressful enough without having to explain your vision to the people closest to you. It was, but it also forced me to develop a strong sense of self-reliance. I couldn't depend on external validation, so I had to learn to trust my own judgment. Sarah nodded, making notes in her portfolio. I've spoken with several of your former employees, and they all mention your leadership style. They said you had this ability to inspire people even when the future was uncertain. When you're building something from nothing, uncertainty is a constant companion. You have to learn to be comfortable with it and help others be comfortable with it too. What about the acquisition? That must have been a surreal experience. I described the negotiation process, the due diligence, the moment when I realized that data flow had become valuable enough to attract attention from major players in the industry. But Sarah pressed deeper. How did it feel to achieve that level of success so young? Did you feel vindicated? The question struck at something I had been avoiding. Vindicated is an interesting word. I felt proven right, I suppose. For years, people had treated my work as a hobby or a phase. The acquisition was concrete evidence that I'd built something meaningful. People including your family? I paused, considering how much to reveal. My parents are wonderful people, but they didn't understand the technology industry. They valued stability and conventional success. What I was doing seemed risky to them. And now? Now they're trying to understand. The Forbes article has gotten their attention in a way my actual achievements never did. Sarah's expression shifted slightly. That's actually something I wanted to discuss. I called your parents' house when I was trying to reach you. Your mother seemed surprised by the call. Surprised how? She didn't seem to know much about your professional accomplishments. When I mentioned the acquisition, she asked me what it meant. It was as if she was learning about your success for the first time. I felt heat rise in my cheeks. My parents and I don't discuss business very often, but this wasn't just business, was it? This was a life-changing achievement. The kind of success that most people would want to share with their families. The conversation had taken a turn I hadn't anticipated. Sarah wasn't just writing a business profile, she was exploring the human cost of entrepreneurial success. My relationship with my parents is complicated, I said finally. They're proud of me, but they've never understood what I do. The Forbes article might help bridge that gap, or it might highlight how wide the gap has become. She was right, and we both knew it. The article would reveal not just my professional success, but the fact that my own family had been largely absent from that success. Tell me about your brother, Sarah said, consulting her notes. He's a doctor, right? Marcus is a resident in emergency medicine. He's brilliant, dedicated, everything you'd want in a physician. And your parents understand his work. Medicine is easier to understand than enterprise software. Everyone knows what doctors do. But that's not the whole story, is it? I looked at her, realizing that she'd done her homework. She'd probably spoken with neighbors, family friends, people who could provide context about the dynamics of our household. My parents have always been more supportive of Marcus's career path, I admitted. It's traditional, respected, stable. What I've done is less conventional. Less conventional, but more financially successful. Success isn't just about money. No, but it's one way to measure impact. You've created jobs, solved problems, built something that will outlast you. That's significant by any measure. The interview continued for another hour. with Sarah asking probing questions about my vision for the technology industry, my role at Tech Global, my plans for the future. But I could tell that the family dynamics had captured her interest in a way that pure business success hadn't. "One last question," she said as she packed up her recorder. "What do you hope people take away from your story?" I thought about the question, about the years of building something in isolation, about the recent changes in how my family viewed my work. I hope they understand that success doesn't always come with a support system. Sometimes you have to build something meaningful despite the people around you not understanding or encouraging it. And sometimes the validation you're seeking from others is less important than the validation you can give yourself. After Sarah left, I sat alone in the conference room, looking out at the city where I'd grown up. The interview had forced me to confront truths I'd been avoiding about my family, my success, and the price of achieving something that others couldn't understand. The Forbes article would be published in 2 weeks. It would tell the world about data flow solutions, about the young woman who'd built a multi-million-dollar company from her college dorm room. But it would also reveal the loneliness of that achievement, the absence of family support, and the complex dynamics that had shaped my relationship with success. For the first time, I wondered if I was ready for that level of exposure, not just of my professional accomplishments, but of the personal cost of achieving them without the people who should have mattered most. The Forbes article hit newsstands on a Thursday morning in April. By noon, my phone was buzzing with congratulatory messages from colleagues, former employees, and college friends I hadn't heard from in years. But the most surreal moment came when my high school economics teacher, Mrs. Patterson, called my parents' house to congratulate them. "Can you believe it?" Mom said when she called me that afternoon, her voice breathless with excitement. Mrs. Patterson saw the article at the grocery store and called immediately. She said she always knew you were special. I remembered Mrs. Patterson well. She taught me about market economics and business fundamentals, but I couldn't recall her showing any particular interest in my potential back then. Now, suddenly, everyone remembered seeing signs of my future success. The local newspaper, the Herald Tribune, wanted to do a follow-up story about the hometown entrepreneur who'd made it to Forbes. The editor, a man named Bill Morrison, who'd covered high school football for 30 years, called my parents asking for an interview. "We'd love to feature Shandra in our Sunday business section," he told Mom. "Local girl makes good. Our readers love these kinds of stories." By the weekend, I was sitting in the Herald Tribune's modest offices, being photographed next to a computer for what Morrison called visual authenticity. The irony wasn't lost on me, the same community that had been indifferent to my unconventional career path was now celebrating it because a national publication had validated it. "Tell our readers about your journey," Morrison said, his digital recorder placed prominently between us. "When did you know you wanted to be an entrepreneur?" The questions were simpler than Sarah Chen's had been, focused more on inspiration than analysis. Morrison wanted a feel-good story about local success, not a deep dive into family dynamics or the challenges of building a business without support. "I've always been fascinated by how technology can solve everyday problems," I said, delivering the kind of soundbite I knew he wanted. "Growing up here gave me a strong work ethic and the confidence to pursue my dreams." Growing up here, the truth was more complicated, but I wasn't about to explain the nuances of feeling invisible in my own family to a small town. Newspaper editor The article ran the following Sunday with the headline "Local Entrepreneur Reaches National Spotlight." My photo took up half the page, accompanied by a sidebar about data flow solutions and my meteoric rise in the technology industry. The community response was immediate and overwhelming. Dad started getting calls at his office from people he barely knew, all wanting to congratulate him on his daughter's success. Mom couldn't go to the grocery store without being stopped by neighbors who had read the article. Everyone's so impressed. She told me during one of our daily check-ins, which had become a new routine since the Forbes piece. "Mrs. Henderson from down the street said she had no idea you were so successful. She wants to have you speak at the Rotary Club." The Rotary Club, the same organization that had invited Marcus to speak about medicine 3 years earlier. Now they wanted to hear from me too, but only after national recognition had made my story newsworthy. The speaking invitation came through official channels. A few days later, Dr. Robert Henley, the club president, called personally to extend the invitation. "We'd be honored to have you address our membership," he said. "Your story is exactly the kind of inspiration our community needs. Young people who stay connected to their roots while achieving great things. Stay connected to their roots." I wondered what he'd think if he knew I'd been building data flow solutions for years before anyone in the community had shown the slightest interest in what I was doing. The speaking engagement was scheduled for the following month. In the meantime, I found myself fielding requests from other local organizations. The Chamber of Commerce wanted me to join their board. The high school asked if I consider mentoring students interested in technology careers. The community college invited me to give a commencement address about entrepreneurship. Each invitation felt both validating and hollow. These were opportunities I would have treasured 5 years earlier when I was struggling to build credibility and connections. Now they felt like participation trophies recognition offered not because of my work, but because someone else had already recognized it. The most telling moment came when I ran into my old high school guidance counselor, Mr. Templeton, at the coffee shop where Marcus and I had talked weeks earlier. "Shandra, I've been hoping to see you," he said, approaching my table with the kind of enthusiasm I'd never seen from him during my high school years. "I've been telling everyone that I knew you'd be successful." I remembered Mr. Templeton differently. When I told him I wanted to study computer science, he'd suggested I consider something more practical like accounting or business administration. When I mentioned my interest in starting my own company someday, he'd recommended focusing on realistic goals. "That's kind of you to say," I replied carefully. "I've been thinking about your story and I realized we should have done more to support students like you back then. We were too focused on traditional paths, college, established careers, playing it's safe. Students like me? Innovators, risk takers, students who saw possibilities the rest of us couldn't see. It was a generous reinterpretation of our past interactions, but I appreciated the acknowledgement. At least he was admitting that the system hadn't been designed to recognize or nurture unconventional success. "I'd love to have you speak to our current students," he continued. "Show them that there are different ways to build a career, especially in technology." I agreed to the speaking engagement partly because I wanted to reach students who might be facing the same lack of understanding I'd experienced, and partly because Mr. Templeton seemed genuinely interested in broadening the school's perspective on success, but the conversation left me thinking about the nature of recognition and validation. The same people who had been indifferent to my aspirations were now celebrating my achievements. The same community that had offered no support was now claiming pride in my success, that it wasn't malicious. It was simply human. People respond to visible, validated success more readily than they respond to potential or unconventional paths. The Forbes article had given them permission to see me differently, to value work they'd previously dismissed or ignored. As I drove home that evening, I thought about the upcoming speaking engagements, the board positions, the mentoring opportunities. They were chances to give back to a community that had shaped me, even if it hadn't always supported me. But they were also reminders of how validation works in our society. Success that goes unrecognized by prestigious institutions remains largely invisible to local communities. It takes external validation, a Forbes article, a major acquisition, national media attention to make local success stories visible. I was grateful for the recognition, but I couldn't forget that it had taken a call from a national magazine to make my hometown notice what I'd been building in their backyard all along. The family dinner that changed everything happened 3 weeks after the Forbes article was published. I'd been putting off a serious conversation with my parents, hoping that their newfound interest in my work might naturally evolve into genuine understanding. But their behavior had become increasingly performative, and I realized that avoiding the truth wasn't helping anyone. We were sitting around the same dining room table, where I'd announced my MIT acceptance, my company's formation, and my acquisition. The same table where Marcus's achievements had been celebrated while mine were politely acknowledged. But this time, I'd come prepared for a different kind of conversation. "I need to talk to you both about something," I said after we'd finished eating, "about how things have been between us." especially since the Forbes article came out. Mom and Dad exchanged glances. They'd grown accustomed to my new status as a family success story, but they still seemed unsure how to navigate our changed dynamic. Of course, honey, Mom said. What's on your mind? I've been thinking about Dr. Martinez's suggestion that we try family therapy. Dr. Martinez was my therapist. A recommendation from a colleague who'd helped me process the complex emotions surrounding my family relationships and my success. I'd been seeing her for 2 months, trying to understand why the validation I'd craved for so long felt so empty now that I had it. Family therapy? Dad's eyebrows rose. Is that really necessary? Things have been going so well lately. That's part of the problem, Dad. Things are going well now because the outside world has told you I'm successful. But what about all the years when I needed your support and didn't get it? The room fell silent. I could see them processing my words, trying to understand what I was asking of them. Shandra, Mom said carefully, we've always supported you. Maybe we didn't understand your work, but we've always been proud of you. Have you, though? Because I have evidence that suggests otherwise. I reached into my bag and pulled out copies of the financial documents I'd found in their office, along with some notes I prepared about our family history. I found these when I was helping with your taxes. Over 8 years, you invested almost $300,000 in Marcus's education and career. When I asked for $10,000 to help start data flow, you told me entrepreneurs needed to sink or swim on their own. Dad shifted uncomfortably. Those were different situations. No, Dad, they weren't. They were both investments in your children's futures. The difference was that you believed in Marcus's future and you didn't believe in mine. I spread the documents across the table, creating a timeline of their financial support for Marcus alongside my own educational and career milestones. Look at this objectively. When Marcus got into medical school, you celebrated with a party and set up a monthly support fund. When I got into MIT, you worried about how far away it was. When Marcus published a research paper, you called all the relatives. When I sold my company for $87 million, you said, "That's nice, honey." Shandra, that's not fair, Mom protested. We didn't understand what you were doing. It's not that we didn't believe in you, we just didn't know how to support something we didn't understand. But you never tried to understand. For 15 years, I've been explaining my work to you, and you've never shown genuine interest. It wasn't until Forbes called that you suddenly wanted to learn about the technology industry. The conversation was more difficult than I'd anticipated. Seeing their faces as I laid out the evidence of their differential treatment was painful, but necessary. Let me ask you something, I continued. Do you remember the day I told you about the acquisition? Of course, Dad said. We were having dinner. Do you remember what you said when I told you it was worth $87 million? They looked at each other, clearly struggling to recall the moment that had been so significant to me. You asked what I was going to do for work next, I said when they didn't answer. You couldn't conceive that I'd achieved financial independence at 32. You were more concerned about me finding another job than celebrating what I'd accomplished. We were just being practical, Mom said weakly. No, you were being dismissive. The same way you've been dismissive of every achievement in my life that didn't fit your narrow definition of success. I pulled out another document, the program from Marcus's medical school graduation. I kept this because I wanted to understand what a real family celebration looked like. 50 people, catered dinner, speeches, slideshow. Marcus deserved all of that, but so did I. My MIT graduation was dinner at Applebee's. The silence stretched between us. I could see them wrestling with my words, trying to reconcile their self-image as loving parents with the evidence I was presenting. What do you want from us, Shandra? Dad asked finally. We can't change the past. I want acknowledgement. I want you to admit that you treated us differently, that you provided Marcus with financial and emotional support while leaving me to figure things out on my own. We thought you preferred being independent, Mom said, but her voice lacked conviction. I learned to be independent because I had to be. Because when I asked for help, you told me I needed to stand on my own, but you never said that to Marcus. The conversation continued for 2 hours, with moments of defensiveness, flashes of insight. and gradual recognition of patterns they'd never consciously acknowledged. It wasn't a comfortable discussion, but it was necessary. I think Dr. Martinez was right about family therapy, I said as the evening wound down. We need professional help to work through this. I love you both, but I can't pretend anymore that everything is fine just because you're suddenly interested in my success. Are you saying you don't want to see us anymore? Mom asked, tears in her eyes. I'm saying I want to see you, but in a way that's honest. I want a relationship based on understanding, not performance. I want you to acknowledge the pain your indifference caused, and I want to work together to build something better. They agreed to try therapy, though I could see their reluctance. For them, admitting that they'd made mistakes meant confronting the possibility that they'd hurt the daughter they loved. For me, it meant the possibility of finally having the relationship I'd always wanted. As I drove home that night, I felt exhausted but hopeful. The conversation had been difficult, but it was the first time we talked honestly about our family dynamics. The Forbes article had forced us to confront uncomfortable truths, but perhaps that confrontation was exactly what we needed. Dr. Martinez had warned me that family change is slow and sometimes painful. People don't shift ingrained patterns overnight, especially when those patterns have shaped relationships for decades. But she also told me that recognition is the first step toward healing. My parents had finally begun to recognize how their behavior had affected me. It wasn't full acknowledgement yet, but it was a beginning. And for the first time in years, I felt like we might actually be able to build the relationship I'd always hoped for. Marcus found me at my apartment the day after my confrontation with our parents. I could see the exhaustion in his face when I opened the door, the kind that comes not from medical residency shifts, but from emotional turmoil. We need to talk, he said, holding up a small leather journal. There's something I need to show you. We sat on my couch, the journal between us like a bridge across years of complicated family dynamics. It was worn around the edges, clearly well used. I've been keeping this since I was 12, Marcus said, his fingers tracing the cover. It started as a way to deal with the pressure of being the smart one, the one who was supposed to become a doctor, but it became something else, a record of what it was really like to be the favorite child. He opened to a page marked with a faded bookmark and began to read in a voice barely above a whisper. March 10th, age 14. Mom and Dad spent 2 hours helping me with my biology homework tonight. They seemed so happy when I understood the concepts, like they were already seeing me in a white coat. But I kept thinking about how Shandra figured out calculus by herself last month, and nobody seemed to notice. I want to tell her she's smarter than me, but I'm afraid if I do, Mom and Dad will stop being proud of me. I felt my chest tighten. Marcus, you don't have to. Yes, I do. You shared your truth with them yesterday. I need to share mine with you. He flipped to another page, this one from his college years, September 3rd, sophomore year. Dad called today to ask about my pre-med requirements. He's already talking about which medical schools might be good fits. Meanwhile, Shandra just started some computer programming project that sounds incredible. But when she tried to explain it at dinner last week, I could see their eyes glazing over. I feel guilty for being excited about their attention when I know she needs it more than I do. The journal entries continued chronologically, documenting moments I'd never known about. Times when Marcus had tried to redirect our parents' attention to my achievements. Instances when he felt burdened by their expectations. His growing awareness that being the favored child came with its own form of imprisonment. Listen to this. 1, he said, finding an entry from medical school. It's from the week after your company started getting those first major clients. October 12th, 3rd year med school. Chandra's business is taking off, but Mom and Dad barely acknowledge it. Dad actually said he hopes she gets this computer phase out of her system soon. I wanted to scream at them. She's building something. From nothing, solving real problems, creating jobs. What I'm doing is following a script that thousands of people follow every year. Why can't they see that what she's doing is actually harder and more impressive? I stared at him, seeing my brother. With new eyes. Why didn't you ever say anything? Because I was a coward. because I was afraid that standing up for you would mean losing their approval, and I've been addicted to that approval my whole life. Because I told myself that you were strong enough to handle their indifference, while I needed their support to survive. He closed the journal and looked at me directly. After you left last night, they called me. They were upset, confused, trying to understand what happened. And I realized I couldn't stay silent anymore. What did you tell them? The truth. I told them that everything you said was accurate, that I'd witnessed their differential treatment our entire lives, and that I'd been too selfish to speak up about it. Marcus leaned back against the couch, running his hands through his hair. Do you know what the hardest part has been? Knowing that I achieved everything I have with a safety net you never had, but still getting credit as if I'd done it on my own. You did achieve it on your own, Marcus. You earned your degree, you're saving lives, with their financial support, their emotional encouragement, their unwavering belief in my path. You built a multi-million-dollar company with student loans and credit card debt. You created something revolutionary while they were worried about whether you were wasting your time. He opened the journal again, finding one of the most recent entries. This is from the day the Forbes article came out. Watching Mom and Dad suddenly understand Shandra's success is painful in a way I didn't expect. They're acting like they've always been supportive, rewriting history to make themselves look better. But I was there. I saw how they dismissed her dreams, how they treated her achievements as hobbies. Now they want to claim credit for a success they never believed in. I've been complicit in this for too long. The room felt quiet except for the sound of traffic outside my window. I looked at my brother, really looked at him, and saw not the golden child I'd resented, but a man who'd been carrying guilt about our family dynamics for years. I went to therapy too, he said quietly. Started 3 months ago after I realized how much the Forbes attention was affecting both of us. Dr. Kim helped me understand that being the favorite child isn't always a gift. It's a kind of pressure too. What kind of pressure? The pressure to be perfect, to never disappoint, to live up to expectations that were often unrealistic. Do you know why I chose emergency medicine? I shook my head. Because it's heroic in a way that other medical specialties aren't. Emergency doctors save lives in dramatic, visible ways. I wanted to be the kind of doctor that would make them proud, that would justify all their investment in me. He pulled out his phone and showed me a text message from our father sent earlier that morning. Son, after last night's conversation with Shandra, I realized we may have put too much pressure on you over the years. We want you to know that we're proud of you no matter what path you choose. That's good, isn't it? It's a start. But it also makes me realize how much of my identity has been built around their approval. I've never had to develop the kind of inner strength you have, the ability to believe in yourself when nobody else does. I reached over and took his hand. Marcus, you're one of the strongest people I know. What you do every day, saving lives, making split-second decisions, that takes incredible courage. But it's courage within a framework they understood and supported. Your courage was different. You had to create your own framework, build something from nothing, persist when everyone around you thought you were making a mistake. He flipped to the very last entry in the journal, dated just 2 days earlier. I need to tell Shandra the truth about our family, not just apologize for our parents' behavior, but acknowledge my own complicity in it. I could have spoken up years ago. I could have redirected their attention to her achievements. I could have refused some of their financial support and insisted they offer the same to her. Instead, I took everything they gave me and told myself it wasn't my responsibility to fix their favoritism. You were a kid, Marcus. Kids don't choose family dynamics, they adapt to them. Maybe when we were children. But I was an adult when you started Dataflow. I was an adult when you achieved financial independence. I was an adult when they dismissed your success, and I said nothing. The weight of his confession settled between us. I could see how much it passed him to acknowledge these truths, not just to me, but to himself. There's something else. He sighed, reaching into his jacket pocket. I want you to have this. He handed me a check for $50,000. Marcus, I can't take this. It's not charity, it's restitution. I calculated how much extra support I received compared to you. Over the years, this doesn't cover everything, but it's a start. I don't need your money. This isn't about what you need. It's about what's right. I benefited from an unfair system, and I want to acknowledge that tangibly. I stared at the check, understanding that this wasn't really about money, it was about acknowledgement, about Marcus taking responsibility for his role in our family's dynamics. Keep the check, I said finally, but use it for something that honors what we've learned. Maybe start a fund for entrepreneurs who don't have family support, or help medical students who can't afford the kind of assistance you received. His eyes filled with tears. You're still taking care of everyone else, even when you're the one who deserved better. We both deserved better, Marcus. We deserved parents who could support us equally, who could recognize different types of success, who could love us without favoritism. What do we do now? We work on healing. We go to family therapy. We learn to have relationships with each other and with our parents that aren't based on old patterns and guilt. Marcus closed the journal and held it against his chest. I'm going to keep writing in this, but the entries are going to be different. Instead of documenting guilt and complicity, I want to document growth and healing. I'd like to read those entries someday. I'd like that too. As he prepared to leave, Marcus turned back to me one more time. Shandra, I need you to know something. Even when I was benefiting from their favoritism, I always knew you were the more impressive one. You were braver, more creative, more willing to take risks. I've been proud of you since we were kids, even when I was too cowardly to say it. After he left, I sat alone with his journal entry echoing in my mind. For years, I'd seen Marcus as the obstacle to my parents' attention, the reason I couldn't get the recognition I craved. But his confession revealed a more complex truth. He'd been trapped by their favoritism just as I'd been hurt by their neglect. His willingness to acknowledge his complicity, to take responsibility for his silence, felt like a gift I hadn't expected. It didn't erase the years of feeling invisible, but it validated my experience in a way that even the Forbes article hadn't. For the first time since childhood, I felt like Marcus and I were truly on the same side, not competing for our parents' attention, but working together to understand and heal from the family dynamics that had shaped us both. The first family therapy session took place on a rainy Tuesday evening in Dr. Martinez's office. The room was carefully neutral beige walls, comfortable chairs arranged in a circle, tissues strategically placed within easy reach. My parents sat stiffly, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of discussing our family problems with a stranger. Thank you all for being here, Dr. Martinez began. Shandra has shared some concerns about family dynamics, and I understand this represents a willingness on everyone's part to work toward better understanding. Dad shifted in his chair. We're here because we love our daughter. But I have to say, we're not sure what exactly needs to be fixed. Every family has its challenges. That's a fair perspective, Dr. Martinez replied. Shandra, would you like to share what brought you to suggest family therapy? Over the next hour, I laid out the same evidence I presented to my parents' weeks. Earlier, the financial disparities, the differential treatment, the years of feeling invisible in my own family. But this time, I had professional guidance to help navigate their responses. I hear you saying that you felt unsupported during crucial periods of your life, Dr. Martinez summarized. And your parents, I hear you saying that you believed you, were showing love in the ways you knew how. These aren't mutually exclusive truths. Mom looked confused. I don't understand. If we were showing love, why does Shandra feel unsupported? Because love and support aren't the same thing, I said. You loved me, but you didn't support my choices. You provided emotional safety for Marcus while leaving me to create my own. The session continued with careful exploration of our family patterns. Dr. Martinez helped my parents see how their behavior had been perceived, while helping me understand their perspective. It was slow, sometimes painful work. What I'm hearing, Dr. Martinez said near the end of our first session, is that everyone has good intentions, but there's been a significant disconnect between intentions and impact. That's very common in families. We scheduled weekly sessions, but I knew that therapy alone wouldn't be enough. I needed to establish clear boundaries about how our relationships would work going forward. The document I prepared was 3 pages long, about how our relationships would work going forward. The document I prepared was 3 pages long. A written outline of what I needed from my family to rebuild our relationship on healthier ground. I called it New Foundations and presented it during our 3rd therapy session. I've written down some guidelines that I think will help us move forward, I said, handing copies to my parents. These aren't ultimatums, they're boundaries that will help me feel respected and valued in our family. The list included specific requests, equal recognition of achievements. When one child's success is celebrated, the others should be acknowledged. With equivalent enthusiasm, financial transparency. If financial support is offered to one child, the reasons for not offering similar support to the other should be clearly explained. Genuine interest. Questions about my work should come from real curiosity, not obligation or performance. Historical acknowledgement. Recognition that past treatment was unequal, and commitment to different patterns going forward. Respectful communication. My career choices and achievements should be discussed with the same respect accorded to traditional professions. Dad read through the document with a furrowed brow. This feels very formal. Are we supposed to sign a contract to be your parents? No. Dad, but I need to know that you understand what I'm asking for. These aren't unreasonable requests. They're basic elements of respectful family relationships, Dr. Martinez intervened. What Shandra is doing is communicating her needs clearly. In healthy relationships, people can express what they need without fear of rejection or ridicule. Mom looked up from the document. Some of these things, like the financial transparency, those decisions were made years ago. We can't go back and change them. I'm not asking you to change the past, I said. I'm asking you to acknowledge it and commit to doing things differently in the future. What if we make mistakes? Dad asked. What if we slip back into old patterns without meaning to? Then we talk about it. But the difference is that now you'll know what the patterns are. You can't claim ignorance anymore. The conversation was difficult but necessary. We spent 2 more sessions working through each point on my list, with Dr. Martinez helping us understand the reasoning behind my requests and the emotional impact of their past behavior. The breakthrough came during our 5th session, when Mom finally said the words I'd been waiting to hear for 32 years. Shandra, I owe you an apology. We treated you and Marcus differently, and that wasn't fair. We made assumptions about what each of you needed, and we were wrong about what you needed. Dad nodded, though I could see the difficulty in his admission. We thought you were so capable that you didn't need our help. But what we were really doing was withholding support because we didn't understand your path. And we're going to do better, Mom continued, not because Forbes told us you were successful, but because you're our daughter and you deserve our support regardless of external validation. Dr. Martinez smiled. This is significant progress. Recognition and accountability are essential first. Steps in changing family dynamics. But I needed more than words. I want to try something, I said, pulling out my phone. I'm going to tell you about a new project I'm considering at Tech Global. I want you to respond the way you would have responded to Marcus telling you about a new rotation or research opportunity. I described a potential initiative to develop AI-powered tools for small businesses, something I was genuinely excited about but hadn't shared with them yet. That sounds fascinating, Mom said, and I could hear her working to engage with enthusiasm rather than polite interest. What kind of problems would these tools solve? And what's the timeline for development? Dad added, is this something that could have a significant impact on the industry? Their questions felt different, more engaged, more curious. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. How did that feel? Dr. Martinez asked them. Different, Dad admitted. I found myself actually wanting to understand the details instead of just waiting for the conversation to end. For me, Mom said, it felt like talking to Marcus about his work. I realized I've never approached Chandra's career with that same level of genuine interest. The session ended with a commitment from all of us to practice new patterns of interaction. It wouldn't happen overnight, but we'd established a framework for healthier communication as we walked out of Dr. Martinez's office that evening. Dad turned to me. Shandra, I want you to know that reading your boundaries document was hard, but it was also clarifying. We didn't realize how our behavior was affecting you. And we want to change, Mom added. Not because we have to, but because we want a better relationship with you. For the first time in months, I felt genuinely hopeful about our family's future. The boundaries I'd set weren't walls, they were guidelines for building something better than what we'd had before. The real test would come in our day-to-day interactions, in how they responded to my successes and challenges going forward. But at least now we all understood what we were working toward, a family dynamic based on mutual respect, equal support, and genuine understanding. It was a beginning, and for now, that was enough. The letter arrived on a Saturday morning in June, 3 months after we'd started family therapy. I found it slipped under my apartment door, written in my mother's careful handwriting on cream-colored stationery that I recognized from special occasions. "My dearest Shandra," it began, and I knew immediately that this wasn't a casual note. I made coffee and settled into my reading chair, giving the letter the attention its formal presentation seemed to demand. "Your father and I have been working with Dr. Martinez on our own, attending sessions, even when you couldn't be there. We wanted to understand not just what we did wrong, but why we did it. What we discovered about ourselves has been difficult but necessary. We realized that our treatment of you and Marcus wasn't just about misunderstanding your career path. It was about our own fears and limitations. When Marcus chose medicine, we could see his future clearly because it matched our ideas about security and success. When you chose technology and entrepreneurship, we couldn't see past our own anxiety about uncertainty. But here's what we should have realized: your willingness to embrace uncertainty, to build something from nothing, to persist when others doubted. These weren't signs that you needed more guidance. They were signs that you had already developed wisdom we never possessed. We failed you, Shandra, not just by withholding financial support or showing less enthusiasm for your achievements. We failed you by not recognizing that your path required more courage than Marcus's, not less. We failed you by not seeing that your independence was a strength we should have celebrated, not a signal that you didn't need our love and support. Dr. Martinez helped. You understand that we projected our own fears onto your choices. We were scared of instability because we built our lives around predictability. We couldn't support what we didn't understand, so we dismissed it instead of educating ourselves. The hardest truth we've had to face is that we didn't give you what every child deserves: parents who believe in their dreams even when those dreams don't match their own vision of success. We're writing this letter because saying these things in therapy felt incomplete. We wanted you to have something tangible, something you could keep and return to if you ever doubted whether we truly understood the impact of our actions. We were wrong. We hurt you. We robbed ourselves of the joy of watching your incredible journey unfold, and we robbed you of the support system you deserved. We can't change the past, but we want to be different going forward. Not because Forbes validated your success, but because you deserved our validation from the beginning. We love you. We're proud of you. We're sorry it took us so long to say these things the way you needed to hear them. With all our love and deep regret. Mom and Dad, I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. It wasn't just an apology, it was a complete acknowledgement of everything I tried to explain to them over the years. They hadn't just admitted their mistakes. They had examined the underlying beliefs and fears that had driven their behavior. Evening, we had our regular family dinner, but the atmosphere was different. There was a heaviness in the air, an awareness that we were at a turning point in our relationship. "Thank you for the letter," I said as we gathered around the table. "It meant everything to me." "We needed to write it," Dad said. "Saying sorry in therapy felt important, but we wanted you to have something permanent. Something that acknowledged how profoundly we misunderstood what you needed from us." Marcus had been included in this dinner intentionally. He'd been attending some of our family therapy sessions, working through his own guilt and his role in our family dynamics. "I have something too," he said, pulling out an envelope. "I wrote you a letter as well, but I also wanted to do something more concrete." Inside the envelope was a certificate establishing the Shandra Erwin Entrepreneurship Fund, a scholarship program for students pursuing unconventional career paths without family financial support. "I used the money I was going to give you," Marcus explained. But instead of just giving it to you, I created something that honors what you accomplished and helps other people who are facing the same challenges you faced. I stared at the certificate, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. Marcus, this is incredible. But you didn't need to. Yes, I did. I benefited from privilege you didn't have, and I stayed silent about it for too long. This feels like a way to turn that privilege into something positive. Mom reached across the table and took my hand. Shandra, we want you to know that we're not just sorry about the past. We're committed to being better in the future. We've been reading about the technology industry, trying to understand your world. And we've started following tech globals, press releases, Dad added. We want to know about your work not because we have to, but because we genuinely want to understand what you're building. The conversation that followed was unlike any we'd had as a family. They asked detailed questions about my current projects, my goals for the future, my thoughts on industry trends. But more importantly, their questions came from genuine curiosity rather than obligation. Tell us about the I initiative you mentioned in therapy, Mom said. What problems are you trying to solve? I found myself explaining complex technical concepts, and for the first time, I saw real engagement in their faces. They asked follow-up questions, made connections to things they'd read, showed the kind of interest they'd always shown in Marcus's medical work. This is what it should have been like all along, I said when our conversation wound down. This is what I needed parents who were curious about my work, who celebrated my achievements, who supported my dreams even when they didn't understand them. We know, Dad said quietly. We lost so many years of really knowing you because we were too limited in our understanding of what success could look like. As the evening ended, I felt something I hadn't experienced in our family relationships before, hope grounded in genuine change rather than wishful thinking. The letter, the scholarship fund, the transformed quality of our conversation, these weren't just gestures. They were evidence of fundamental shifts in how my parents saw me and how they understood their role in my life. The Forbes article had been the catalyst for this reckoning, but the real change had come through months of difficult conversations, professional guidance, and the willingness of everyone involved to examine their behavior honestly. There's one more thing, Mom said as I was leaving. We want to throw you a party. A party? A real celebration of your achievements. Not because Forbes recognized you, but because we want to celebrate everything you've built. We want our friends and family to understand what you've accomplished. And we want to do it the way we should have done it years ago. I looked at my parents, really looked at them, and saw people who had genuinely evolved. The party they were proposing wasn't about their image or their need to be seen as supportive parents. It was about their desire to publicly acknowledge my achievements and the way they always acknowledged Marcus's. I'd like that, I said. But I want Marcus to be honored too, not for his role as the favored child, but for his willingness to examine that role and work towards something better. That's perfect, Dad said. A celebration of both our children and of the family we're becoming. As I drove home that night, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this point. The Forbes article had forced a reckoning that probably wouldn't have happened otherwise. But the real work, the therapy, the honest conversations, the genuine efforts to change that had been a choice my family had made. It wasn't a perfect resolution. Decades of family patterns don't disappear overnight. But it was real progress, built on acknowledgement, accountability, and a shared commitment to doing better. For the first time in my life, I felt truly seen and valued by my family, not despite my unconventional path, but because of the courage and determination it had required. The celebration my parents planned was everything my achievements had never received, but more than that, it was everything our family had never been. The venue was the same community center where Marcus's medical school graduation party had been held, but this time the banner read, "Celebrating Shandra and Marcus, excellence in all forms." The guest list included extended family, high school teachers, family friends, and colleagues from both our careers. But what struck me most was the effort my parents had put into understanding what they were celebrating. Instead of vague references to my computer work, the invitation specifically mentioned data flow solutions, the tech global acquisition, and my role in advancing small business technology. I spent weeks researching your industry, Mom confessed, as we set up decorations the morning of the party. I wanted to be able to talk intelligently about your work, not just parrot things I'd read in Forbes. The slideshow they prepared told the story of both Marcus and me chronologically, giving equal weight to our achievements. My MIT acceptance was featured alongside his medical school admission. Photos of me working on early data flow prototypes appeared next to images of Marcus in his first white coat. The acquisition announcement shared space with Marcus's research publication. We wanted people to see the full picture, Dad explained. 2 children who chose different paths, but both achieved remarkable things. Dr. Martinez had warned us that family healing isn't linear, that there would be setbacks, moments of regression, and times when old patterns reasserted themselves. But over the 6 months following our initial confrontation, I had watched my parents work genuinely hard to change how they interacted with both Marcus and me. The most meaningful example had come 2 weeks earlier when I'd been promoted to senior vice president of innovation at Tech Global. Instead of the polite congratulations I'd grown accustomed to, Mom had called me immediately. Shandra, this is incredible. Tell me everything. What does this promotion mean? What new responsibilities will you have? How does this position you for the future? Her enthusiasm had been genuine, born from months of educating herself about my industry and learning to appreciate the significance of my career milestones. Similarly, when Marcus had been accepted for a fellowship in emergency medicine research, they'd celebrated his achievement without the overwhelming fanfare that had previously made me feel invisible. The recognition was enthusiastic but proportionate, the kind of response that honored his accomplishment without diminishing anyone else's. You know what I've realized? Marcus said as we watched our parents arrange photo displays. They're not just learning to treat us equally, they're learning to see us as individuals with different but equally valuable paths. He was right. The changes weren't just about correcting past inequities. They were about developing a more sophisticated understanding of success itself. My parents had begun to appreciate that innovation and traditional achievement could coexist, that risk-taking and stability were both legitimate approaches to building a career. The party itself was a revelation. I watched my parents introduce me to their friends with the same pride they'd always shown when discussing Marcus's medical career. This is our daughter Shandra, Dad told his golf buddy Bill. She built a technology company from her college dorm room and sold it for $87 million. Now she's helping major corporations understand how to serve small businesses better. No qualifiers, no apologies for my unconventional path, no subtle suggestions that my success was somehow less legitimate than traditional careers. Just straightforward pride in what I'd accomplished. The most powerful moment came when Mrs. Patterson, my high school economics teacher, approached me during the party. Shandra, I owe you an apology, she said. When you were my student, I saw your potential, but I guided you towards safe choices. I should have encouraged your entrepreneurial instincts instead of worrying about stability. Mrs. Patterson, you were doing what you thought was best. Maybe, but that's not an excuse. I've been thinking about this since your Forbes article came out. How many students have I steered away from innovative thinking because I was more comfortable with predictable outcomes? Her honesty was unexpected and moving. It made me realize that my family's evolution was part of a broader pattern, that many people struggle to recognize and support unconventional success until it's validated by external authorities. Later, that evening, Marcus pulled me aside for a private conversation. I have something to tell you, he said. I've decided to leave my fellowship program. Marcus, why? You love emergency medicine. I do love it, but I've realized I love the innovation aspect more than the traditional practice. I want to develop new protocols for emergency response. Maybe start a company that creates technology for first responders. I stared at my brother, saying him clearly for perhaps the first time. You want to become an entrepreneur. Terrifying, right? But watching your journey, understanding what you built from nothing, it's inspired me to think about my own path differently. What do Mom and Dad think? That's the amazing part. When I told them, they didn't panic about me leaving a secure position. They asked thoughtful questions about my vision, my timeline, my plans for making the transition. They're learning to support choices they don't fully understand. The conversation continued as the party wound down around us. Marcus described his ideas for emergency medicine technology, his plans for combining his medical expertise with entrepreneurial innovation. For the first time, our roles were reversed. I was the one offering advice about starting a company, while he was the one taking the uncertain path. "Are you scared?" I asked. Terrified, but also excited in a way I've never been about my career. I think this is what you felt when you started Dataflow, the thrill of building something that doesn't exist yet. As guests began to leave, I found myself standing with my parents, watching the cleanup process that marked the end of a truly meaningful celebration. "Thank you," I said, "for this party, for the work you've done in therapy, for learning to see me differently." "We should be thanking you," Mom replied, "for having the courage to tell us the truth about how our behavior affected you, for giving us the chance to be better parents, and for showing us that there are many ways to build a meaningful life," Dad added. We were so limited in our understanding of what success could look like. The drive home that night felt different from any I'd taken after a family gathering. Instead of feeling drained or frustrated, I felt energized and hopeful. My family had evolved from a group of people who loved each other despite their differences to a group that celebrated and supported those differences. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. Real relationships are more complex than that. There would still be moments of misunderstanding, times when old patterns crept back in, situations where we'd have to consciously choose new ways of interacting. But for the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged in my own family, not as the difficult child who needed to be tolerated, not as the successful daughter who had surprised everyone, but as an integral part of a family system that had learned to value each member's unique contributions. The Forbes article had been the catalyst, but the real transformation had come through our willingness to examine painful truths and work together towards something better. We'd rebuilt our relationships on a foundation of mutual respect, genuine interest, and equal support. It was exactly what I'd always hoped for, and more than I'd ever believed was possible. 1 year after the Forbes article changed everything, I found myself in a familiar but transformed space in my parents' dining room, where so many difficult conversations had taken place. But this time we were gathered for a different kind of announcement. "I have news," I said, placing a business plan on the table between us. "I'm leaving Tech Global to start a new company." The silence that followed wasn't the uncomfortable quiet of past revelations, but the attentive pause of people processing important information. "Tell us about it," Mom said, leaning forward with genuine interest, a response that still amazed me after months of experiencing it. "It's called Nexus Innovations. We're developing AI-powered tools specifically designed for underserved small businesses companies that have been largely ignored by big tech because they're not seen as profitable enough." I opened the business plan and walked them through my vision. Unlike my first entrepreneurial venture, which I built in isolation, this one was being launched with the full awareness and support of my family. "The market opportunity is significant," I continued, "but more importantly, we're solving real problems for people who need these solutions most. Rural businesses, minority-owned enterprises, companies that have been left behind by digital transformation." Dad studied the financial projections with the same careful attention he'd once reserved for Marcus's medical school applications. "What's your timeline for launch?" 6 months for the MVP, 12 months for full market rollout. I've already secured initial funding and assembled a core team." "And you're leaving a senior position at Tech Global for this?" Mom asked, not with concern about my judgment, but with curiosity about my decision-making process. The promotion was wonderful, but I realized I am an entrepreneur at heart. Building something new, solving problems that others overlook, that's where I'm most effective. Marcus, who had been quietly reviewing the business plan, looked up with excitement. "Shandra, this is incredible. The emergency medicine technology I'm developing could integrate with platforms like this. Small hospitals and rural emergency services need exactly this kind of innovation." In the year since our family's transformation had begun, Marcus had indeed left his fellowship to pursue entrepreneurial medicine. His company, Emergency Innovations, was developing rapid diagnostic tools for first responders. Our parents had supported his transition with the same enthusiasm they now showed for my new venture. "So you're both starting companies at the same time?" Dad said, a smile spreading across his face. I have to admit, a year ago, this would have terrified me. Now I'm excited to see what you both build. The conversation that followed exemplified everything our family had about supporting each other's dreams. My parents asked detailed questions about my market research, my competitive analysis, my plans for scaling the business. But more importantly, they offered the kind of practical support that had always been available to Marcus. "We'd like to invest," Mom said quietly. "Not as a loan, but as partners in your success." I looked at her in surprise. "Mom, you don't need to. We want to. We have savings that we plan to leave as inheritance anyway. We'd rather invest in your future now, when you can benefit from both the financial support and our confidence in your vision. Besides," Dad added, "we missed the chance to support data flow solutions from the beginning. We don't want to miss this opportunity." Their offer represented more than financial backing. It was a complete reversal of the attitudes that had shaped our family dynamics for decades. They were choosing to invest in uncertainty, to support innovation, to partner with me in building something that didn't yet exist. "There's something else," I said, pulling out another document. "I want Marcus to be my co-founder." Marcus looked stunned. "Shandra, I'm flattered, but our companies serve different markets, not as similar companies as integrated solutions. Emergency medicine and small business technology might seem unrelated, but they share common challenges: limited resources, need for efficiency, lack of access to cutting-edge tools." I'd been thinking about this partnership for months, watching Marcus develop his entrepreneurial instincts while recognizing how our different expertise could complement each other. Imagine emergency response systems that integrate seamlessly with small hospital networks, or diagnostic tools that can be deployed in rural areas without complex infrastructure requirements. We could build something neither of us could create alone. The excitement in Marcus's eyes was immediate. An integrated platform for underserved markets' medical and business solutions, designed for communities that big companies ignore. Exactly. We'd be solving similar problems in different sectors, but with shared technology and overlapping customer bases. My parents watched this exchange with something approaching wonder. 12 months earlier, Marcus and I had been trapped in competitive dynamics that prevented us from seeing each other clearly. Now we were planning to combine our expertise in service of a shared vision. "This is what we always hoped for," Mom said softly. "Not competition between you, but collaboration. Not separate successes, but shared achievements." And Dad added, "It represents something we never understood before, that innovation often comes from connecting ideas that others see as unrelated." The rest of the evening was spent developing plans for our integrated company, which we decided to call Essential Innovations, a name that captured our focus on serving communities and businesses that others considered non-essential. As the conversation wound down, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. The Forbes article had been the catalyst for change, but the real transformation had come through months of difficult conversations, professional guidance, and everyone's willingness to examine their assumptions about success and family dynamics. "You know what's interesting?" I said as we prepared to leave. "A year ago, I was seeking your approval for achievements you couldn't understand. Now I have your partnership in building something we all believe in." That's the difference between recognition and relationship, Dr. Martinez had told us during one of our final family therapy sessions. Recognition is about validating what's already happened. Relationship is about supporting what's still being created. As I drove home that night, I thought about the business cards I'd have printed for Essential Innovations. Unlike the Data Flow Solutions cards, which had represented my solitary vision, these would represent a family business built on mutual respect, equal partnership, and shared commitment to meaningful work. The Forbes article had made me visible to the world, but rebuilding my family relationships had made me visible to myself in new ways. I was no longer the daughter trying to prove her worth or the entrepreneur working in isolation. I was part of a family system that celebrated innovation, supported risk-taking, and understood that success comes in many forms. Essential innovations would face all the challenges that any startup encounters: market uncertainties, competitive pressures, the constant possibility of failure. But unlike my first company, this one would be built with the full support of people who believed in my vision, not because external authorities had validated it, but because they understood its value from the beginning. The transformation in my family hadn't erased the years of feeling invisible, but it had taught us all something valuable about the nature of support and recognition. True validation doesn't come from external authorities. It comes from people who see your potential even when your path is unclear, who invest in your dreams even when the outcome is uncertain. 6 months later, Essential Innovations launched its first integrated platform. The technology Marcus and I had developed was already being used by small hospitals in rural communities and minority-owned businesses in urban centers we'd created. Something that neither of us could have built alone, something that served communities that bigger companies had overlooked. The local newspaper wanted to do another feature story, this time about the entrepreneurial siblings who were changing. How business and medicine serve underserved communities. But more meaningful to me was the call I received from my mother the day our platform went live. "Shandra, I just read the first customer reviews on your website," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "That small town hospital in Montana, the family restaurant in Detroit, they're talking about how your technology is changing their operations. You and Marcus are making a real difference in people's lives." Her pride was evident, but it was different from the pride she'd expressed. After the Forbes article, this wasn't pride in external recognition, it was pride in the substance of what we were accomplishing. "We learned something important this year," she continued. "Supporting your children isn't about celebrating their successes after they're validated by others. It's about believing in their potential before anyone else does." That evening, our family gathered for dinner as we'd done countless times before. But everything about these gatherings had changed. Marcus and I shared updates about our business with parents who asked informed questions and offered thoughtful advice. They discussed our challenges and opportunities with the same engagement they'd always brought to conversations about traditional careers. "I have an announcement," Dad said as we finished eating. "Your mother and I have decided to become more active investors in innovative businesses. We want to support other entrepreneurs who are building something meaningful. We realized," Mom added, "that we have resources and experience that could help people who are facing the same challenges you faced when you started Dataflow. People who have vision but lack family support." They decided to establish a formal fund, using the Marcus Erwin Entrepreneurship Fund as a foundation, but expanding it to support a broader range of innovative ventures. It was their way of turning their newfound understanding into action that could benefit others. As I looked around the dinner table that night, I saw not just the family I'd been born into, but the family we'd all chosen to become. We'd evolved. From a group of people who loved each other despite their differences to a team that leveraged those differences to create something meaningful. The Forbes article had changed my life in ways I never could have anticipated. It had forced a reckoning with family dynamics that might otherwise have remained unexamined for decades. But more than that, it had taught us all that recognition without relationship is hollow, while relationship without genuine understanding is unsustainable. Essential Innovations continue to grow, expanding into new markets and developing additional tools for underserved communities. Marcus and I had found our rhythm as business partners, combining his medical expertise with my technology background to create solutions neither of us could have envisioned alone. But the real success wasn't measured in revenue or user adoption. It was measured in the transformed quality of our family relationships. We'd learned to support each other's dreams before they were validated by others, to celebrate different types of achievement equally, and to invest in each other's potential, rather than just recognizing established success. 2 years after that first phone call from Forbes, I received another call from a journalist, this time from Harvard Business Review, wanting to feature essential innovations in a story about family businesses that were changing their industries. "What makes your partnership with your brother so effective?" the journalist asked. "We learned to see each other clearly," I said. "Not as competitors for our parents' attention, but as collaborators with complementary strengths. And we have parents who support innovation even when they don't fully understand it." That's unusual in family businesses. It is, but it's also the foundation of everything we've built. When your family believes in your vision before anyone else validates it, you can take risks and pursue opportunities that others might avoid. After the interview, I called my parents to tell them about the upcoming Harvard Business Review feature, another national magazine. Mom said with a laugh, "But this time we're not surprised. We're just proud of what you and Marcus have accomplished together." And grateful, Dad added, that we learn to be the kind of parents who support our children's dreams rather than limiting them to our own understanding of success. The Harvard Business Review article would be published. Essential innovations would continue to grow, and our family would face new challenges and opportunities. But the foundation we built based on mutual respect, genuine support, and the understanding that success comes in many forms would remain constant. I'd started this journey seeking recognition from people who couldn't see my worth. I'd ended it with something far more valuable. Relationships built on understanding, support that preceded validation, and the knowledge that true success isn't just about what you achieve, but about who stands with you while you're building it. The phone call from Forbes had changed everything, but not in the way I'd expected. It hadn't just brought me recognition, it had brought my family together in a new and meaningful way. And that transformation was worth more than any acquisition, any article, or any external validation could ever be.